My name is Lena Ortiz, and the last time my husband hit me, my family showed up with a casserole and advice about keeping the peace. Not one person asked, "Who did this to you?" They asked what I had done to set him off. I was on the sofa when they walked in, a bag of frozen peas pressed to my cheek, the TV murmuring some game show nobody was really watching. My left eye was already turning that ugly, muddy purple. It hurt when I moved it, but the part that ached the most was the silence. My mother stopped in the doorway, holding a glass baking dish wrapped in foil. "Oh," she said, eyes catching on the bruise for half a second. "Rough day? Something like that?" I replied. My father came in behind her, dropped his keys in the little bowl by the door, like he always did, and gave me the kind of look you give a dented car. Annoyed that it's damaged, more annoyed that fixing it will cost you time. He didn't say, "What happened?" He said, "You two need to stop fighting in front of the neighbors." In the bedroom, my husband Caleb laughed at something on his phone. He knew they were here. He just didn't care. Mom set the casserole down in the kitchen, peeled back one corner of the foil, and said, "Marriage is work. Honey, you can't run home every time it gets hard." "I'm not home," I said quietly. "This is my home." She straightened, mishearing me on purpose. "See, you're already blessed. A house, a husband with a good job. Don't throw it away over moods." She meant his moods. She said it like they were weather patterns. Uncontrollable, expected, something you just dress for. Dad clapped me on the shoulder, not too close to the bruise, and offered the line I had heard my whole life. "You're tough, Lena. Don't blow this up. Be smarter than that." Smarter than what? Smarter than leaving? Smarter than staying alive. They stayed exactly 12 minutes. Long enough to put the casserole in the fridge, short enough not to be implicated in anything messy. When they left, my mother kissed the air next to my cheek, deliberately avoiding the damaged side of my face. The door clicked shut behind them, soft and final. That sound used to make me feel safe. That night it sounded like a verdict. No one was coming. Not my parents, not my church, not the friends who'd stopped inviting me out because Caleb didn't like them. The bruise hurt, but that realization, that was the real break. I sat there a long time, peas melting against my skin, the room growing dim. Eventually I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and flipped on the smallest lamp we owned. A cheap little thing with a crooked shade. The light was weak, but it was mine. I decided, in that ugly yellow glow, that if nobody was going to save me, I was going to have to stop waiting and start planning. 3 hours earlier, I hadn't felt brave at all. I was barefoot at the sink, rinsing rice for dinner, when Caleb started in again. He'd had a bad day, which meant I was going to have a worse night. "You know what my captain said today?" He called from the doorway, uniform shirt still half-buttoned, badge catching the light. He said promotion might be on the table, if I can prove I don't have distractions. Distractions. That was his new word for me. For our rent. For the groceries I paid for with my boring office job while he ran around playing hero as a paramedic. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands slowly. "You mean me?" He rolled his eyes. "Don't start." "I'm not starting," I said. "I'm just not disappearing. There's a difference." He stepped closer, the air around him tight with stale coffee and adrenaline. "You're always making something out of nothing, Lena. You nitpick. You nag. You make everything about you. You grabbed my wrist so hard last week I couldn't type the next day." I said, voice shaking but steady. "That's not me making it about me. That's you putting your hands on me." He laughed, a small, dangerous sound. "You're still hung up on that? You left a fingerprint?" I said. 5 of them, actually. I should have stopped there. I didn't. I took pictures, I added, in case you forgot. His face changed. It was quick, like a curtain dropping. The joking, charming Caleb went away, and the other one, the one who showed up when the door was locked and the blinds were closed, stepped forward. "You took pictures?" He repeated. I heard my heart in my ears. I barely registered his hand moving before it landed. Open palm, full force. The crack of it echoed against the tile. My head snapped sideways. My teeth clicked into my tongue, and the taste of metal spilled into my mouth. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was how practiced it felt. How easily his body remembered this motion. The mixing bowl crashed to the floor, rice spilling like confetti around my bare feet. I grabbed the counter with one hand, steadying myself. The other flew instinctively toward my face. "See what you make me do?" he asked, already angry at me for what he had done. "If you'd just let things go." I didn't say I was sorry. For the first time in 3 years, I did not apologize. I just stared at him, one hand pressed to my burning cheek, and said nothing. The silence made him uncomfortable. It always did. He needed me to spin, to plead, to promise I'd do better. That was part of the script. Without my lines, he suddenly didn't know his own. "I'm gonna shower," he muttered, backing away. "Cool off. Don't be dramatic, okay?" He left me standing there among the scattered rice. I watched him go, watched his broad back, the badge still pinned to his shirt. The irony was almost funny. The man trained to stop bleeding was the one making me bruise. I cleaned up the mess on autopilot. By the time he came back out, damp hair, pajama pants, phone in hand, I was on the sofa with a bag of frozen peas. He glanced at my face, smirked like it offended him, and lay down on the other couch. 15 minutes after that, he was snoring. 45 minutes after that, my parents knocked. 12 minutes after that, I knew I was on my own. What my parents didn't know was this, that slap wasn't the first. It was just the last one I was willing to explain away. The first time he grabbed me hard enough to leave marks. He cried afterward. He sat on the bathroom floor, head in his hands, saying, "I'm just like my father. I'm so scared I'll lose you." He shook and begged and promised. I forgave him. The second time, he didn't cry. He bought me a bracelet, slid it over the fading yellow bruise on my wrist and said, "Don't make me that mad again, okay?" I told myself stress made him cruel. Night shifts. Trauma. A system that chewed him up, but a funny thing happens when someone hurts you enough times. The pattern becomes clearer than the excuses. 6 months before the slap you just heard about, I sat on a metal folding chair in the back of a community center and listened to a man named Whistleblower talk about safety plans. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a therapist. He was a case manager with a nonprofit whose flyers I'd found hidden behind diet clinic ads on a bulletin board at the grocery store. "You don't have to decide today," he'd said to the small circle of us who showed up that Tuesday night. "You don't have to walk out tonight, or next week, but you do need a plan for the day you are ready." A woman across from me asked, "What if he finds out I came here?" Then I didn't exist. Whistleblower replied calmly, "You were at yoga. You were at book club. You were in the car scrolling your phone. We'll never call your house. But if you decide to leave, you won't be doing it blind." After the meeting, my hands still shaking, I stayed behind. "I live with a paramedic," I told him quietly. "He knows every excuse the ER nurses hear. I'm scared there won't be a record. Or that no one will believe me if I try to report him." Whistleblower didn't look away from the bruise half hidden under my sleeve, the stiffness in my shoulders, the way I flinched when someone dropped a chair nearby. "You don't need anyone's permission to not be hurt," he said. "But you do need backup. Start small. Take photos of injuries. Keep a private journal, dates, times, what happened, what was said. Email them to an address he doesn't know. You're not being paranoid. You're building a trail in case you ever need one." For months, that was all I did. I became two people. The girl who laughed at Caleb's coworkers' jokes at cookouts, and the woman who took photos of bruises in the bathroom mirror at work. I wrote everything down. The screaming, the shoves, the time he threw my phone against the wall and told me if I ever dialed 911 on him, he'd make sure I needed an ambulance. Each entry went into a hidden email folder, named after a fake store loyalty program. Each picture backed up to a cloud account he didn't know existed. I didn't know if I'd ever use it, but on the night with the rice and the slap and the casserole, when the door clicked shut behind my parents and the house finally went quiet, I knew. It was time. In the soft glow of that crooked kitchen lamp, I pulled my regular phone out of my pocket. My hand hesitated over the contacts. I didn't call my mother. I scrolled to the bottom, to a number saved under dentist, after hours. It was the one Wazy had typed into my phone himself, then told me to hide. I texted one word, go. The typing bubbles showed up almost instantly. Are you safe to talk? I typed back, he's asleep for now. 3 dots. Then I'm outside in 10. Grab IDs, meds, and whatever you can carry in one trip. Don't wait for perfect. I put the phone down and moved. It's amazing how much of your life you can reduce to a single bag when you're motivated. Wallet, passport, birth certificate, the good bra, sweatpants, one framed photo of my little brother and me at the county fair, before Caleb, before all of it. I didn't pack the wedding album. Caleb snored from the other room, oblivious. I put my evidence on a thumb drive I'd been adding to for months. Photos, screenshots, emails, everything, and slipped it into the pocket of my hoodie. Then I stood in the hallway and looked around the house I had cleaned 1,000 times. The house where every picture on the wall had a story that ended with me apologizing for something I hadn't done. You can have it, I whispered to the empty room. You can keep it all. I left the bag of peas on the counter, melted and limp. When I opened the front door, cool night air hit my bruised cheek. It stung, then soothed. A silver hatchback idled at the curb. Headlights off. Inside, I could see the glow of a phone screen and the outline of a man in a hoodie. I got in the passenger seat and closed the door, as gently as if the whole world were sleeping. You ready? Asked Wazy, eyes flicking from my face to the rearview mirror, checking the windows, the street. No, I answered honestly. But I'm going anyway. That counts, he said, putting the car in drive. We didn't talk much on the way to the shelter. The radio was off. The city lights slid past my window in streaks of orange and white. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. Where are you? Food getting cold. Then, 1 minute later, if you're with your mother, don't bother coming back. I powered the phone all the way off. For the first time since I'd bought it, the screen went completely black. I didn't realize how heavy that constant connectivity had felt until it was gone. The shelter wasn't some glamorous hidden bunker. It was a converted house on a quiet side street, with peeling paint and a ramp added awkwardly to the front steps. The porch light hummed. Inside, the lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and coffee that had been reheated too many times. A woman at the desk gave me forms and a clipboard, and a gentle look I almost couldn't stand. I filled out my legal name, social, emergency contacts. I left the family section blank. Do you want to file a police report? She asked, sliding a box of tissues closer. Tonight, tomorrow, or not at all. You get to choose. I thought of Caleb's badge, his uniform, the way officers waved at him at gas stations like they were all part of the same club. If I don't, I said, my voice rough, he keeps his gun and his access. If I do, I'm the girl who got a hero in trouble. Or, said a voice behind me, you're the woman who finally made it stop. I turned. It was Wazy, leaning against the doorway with a cheap vending machine coffee in his hand. He nodded toward my hoodie pocket. You brought the drive. I pulled it out. My fingers had left little crescents in the plastic from gripping it too hard. Every time it got bad, you documented, he said. Tonight, that work gets to pay rent. We sat in a small office while a night shift advocate plugged the drive into a computer. On the screen, my private life lit up in clinical thumbnails. Bruises, door frames with cracks, holes in drywall, threatening texts, a screenshot of my call log the night he'd called me 37 times in a row because I stayed late at work. The advocate let out a breath through her nose, anger flickering and then settling into focus. This is a lot, she said. That's good. It makes it harder to ignore. We can call the on-duty detective we work with and at least file an incident report tonight. It's your choice. I thought of my mother's voice. Marriage is work. Don't air your dirty laundry. I thought of Caleb's hand, flashing toward my face like I was something he needed to swat. I thought of myself sitting on that couch, frozen peas on my cheek, realizing the cavalry wasn't coming. I'm done protecting him, I said. Call whoever you need. Detective Harris showed up in jeans and a worn leather jacket, not the full suit I'd seen on TV. He listened. Really listened. I told him everything. Not in a dramatic monologue, but in broken, practical pieces. This was the first time he slapped my face, I said, pointing. But he's shoved me, grabbed me, blocked doors for years. He always says he didn't mean to. But it keeps happening. Here are the dates. He looked through the photos, the texts, the journal entries I'd exported. This is detailed, he said. Did someone coach you?
Les.
I replied, because he's one of you. I saw the flash of recognition in his eyes. Not surprise, exactly, wariness. What do you want to do tonight? He asked, pen poised. What can document this, and let it sit, or we can move. I can't promise he'll be held as long as you want, but I can at least make sure there's a record he can't bury. I want a restraining order, I said, and I want him to not be the one showing up if some other woman calls 911. That last part is above my pay grade, he said, not unkindly. But this part, we can start. We spent hours on statements, forms, copies. My hand cramped from signing my name. By the time they drove me to the emergency room for photos and an exam, it was nearly morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The nurse touched my cheek with clinical detachment but warm eyes. Some of us notice, she murmured as she adjusted the camera. Even when we can't say it out loud. I'm glad you're here. They sent a patrol car to my house while I was still at the hospital. Caleb wasn't arrested for what he'd done that night. That would come later, once the DA reviewed everything. But he was removed. His service weapon was collected. His supervisor was notified. I didn't see any of it happen. I didn't need to. Knowing I wouldn't have to walk back into that house was enough. The shelter gave me a small room that first week. Twin bed. Metal dresser. A window that stuck when you tried to open it. Freedom doesn't always look like much at first. On the second night, the adrenaline crash hit. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My head pounded. I sat on the end of the bed and stared at the blank white wall, like it might know what came next. That's when I called my mother. It rang 5 times. Then, Lena. She sounded like I'd woken her up. It was only 9:30. Mom, I said. I left. Left where? The edge in her voice wasn't concern, it was inconvenience. Caleb? The house? I'm at a shelter. I swallowed. The police have my statement. There's going to be a hearing for a restraining order. Silence. Then, softly, Lena, why would you do that? You know how this will look. To the family. To the church. To his work. You can't just take a man's life down because you had an argument. He hit me? I said. He has been hurting me for years. Everyone loses their temper, she countered. Your father yelled, and I didn't go running to strangers. Marriage is about sacrifice. About keeping things private. He's a paramedic with a gun, I said. If I keep this private, someone is going to die. Maybe me. Maybe the next woman. That is dramatic, she snapped. We raised you stronger than this, Lena. You don't quit. You pray. You forgive. You work it out. Something in me, that last little child piece that still hoped she would suddenly understand, went very, very still. I'm not calling for your permission, I said quietly. I'm calling so that the next time someone asks where your daughter is, you don't have to lie. She started to say my name again, that scolding way she had, but I lowered the phone from my ear, listened to her voice become distant, and then ended the call. I put the phone face down on the cheap nightstand. I didn't throw it. I didn't scream. I just sat there in the quiet and let a different truth settle in. I did not need her to believe me for this to be real. I just needed to stop trying to make her the hero of a story she didn't want to be in. 2 weeks later, after the emergency protective order was granted, I moved into a tiny studio over a laundromat. The whole place was smaller than our old living room. But every square foot was mine. I set my single suitcase on the floor, opened the one window that worked, and listened to the washers thump below like distant drums. On my mattress, I opened my laptop. There was an email at the top of my inbox from Wazy, with a subject line. Optional, but I think you're ready. Inside, there was a link to a podcast and the email address of its host, a journalist named Nora Blake. She'd done episodes on bad cops, abusive pastors, CEOs who used NDAs to hide it all. You don't owe anyone your story. His message read, court is one thing, the internet is another. But if you want the truth somewhere he can't edit, this might be it. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. Then I started typing. I sent Nora everything I'd already given to the detective. The photos, the logs, the threats, the video statement I'd recorded in the shelter office, my voice flat but clear. At the end of the email, I wrote, if this never airs, that's okay. I just need one place where the whole thing is written down. If anything happens to me, please do not let them call me hysterical or ungrateful, without mentioning what he did with the badge they gave him. I hovered over send for 3 full minutes. Then I clicked. The next morning, there was a reply. Lena, I believe you. I've seen this pattern too many times not to. If you're sure, I'd like to record an interview. We'll change your voice if you want. We'll check every fact. And we'll give you final say on whether it airs. You're not a prop. You're a person. Nora. 3 weeks after that, my episode went live. I didn't refresh the page obsessively. I thought I would, but I didn't. I went to work at my new temp job instead, alphabetizing files and trying not to check my phone. At lunch, I finally looked. My notifications were a mess. Some supportive. Some furious that I'd ruined a good man's career. Some from cousins and old classmates pretending they'd always worried about me. One message stopped me cold. I recognized his voice. I'm a nurse. He worked my shift for 6 months. He used to talk about crazy accuses who bruised themselves. I thought I was paranoid. I'm not. Thank you. Camille, another. I dated him before you. I didn't have proof, just scars and panic attacks. Your story made me feel less stupid. Jay. The next was from a username I didn't recognize. He came to our high school as a guest speaker last year to talk about healthy relationships. My little sister sat in the front row. I'm sending this episode to our principal. Thank you for the receipts. D. I put my phone down and realized my hands were steady. Not because I wasn't scared. Caleb had already violated the no contact order, once with a burner number, and there were more court dates ahead, but because the echo in my head that used to sound like my mother, "You're being dramatic," finally had competition. There were other voices now. Women, men, strangers who saw themselves in my story, and, for once, didn't feel alone. We didn't stop with one episode. When the dust settled a little, Wazy called. I've been getting emails, he said. Woman who heard your story and realized they had more than bad night. They're asking what to do with evidence. Screenshots. Journals. Stuff like what you did. Tell them to store it, I said. Somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't reach. I did, he replied. But I'm thinking bigger. A secure archive. Not just for lawyers, but for patterns. So when someone like Caleb gets reported in 3 counties, it doesn't get lost because each officer only sees one piece. You want to build a database of red flags, I said slowly. I want to build a place where no one can say, we had no idea, he answered. Not anymore. We met in the back room of the same community center where I'd first heard him talk about safety plans. The linoleum was still cracked. The coffee was still bad. There were 4 of us now. Me, Wazy, a woman named Priya whose ex-husband was a worship leader, a man named Tom who'd watched his sister go through what I had and swore no one else in his life would do it alone. We bought a cheap domain name. Put a simple page online, just white background, black text. We are not asking you to believe us. We are showing you. Below that, a form to submit documentation, encrypted, stripped of identifiers unless the person chose to give them, backed up in triplicate. We didn't promise justice. That wasn't ours to give. But we promised proof. We promised a place where the patterns could finally be seen. We called it the ledger. The last time I saw Caleb was from across a courtroom. He wore a suit instead of his uniform. No badge. No gun. Just a cheap tie and a lawyer who kept objecting whenever I used the word hit instead of pushed. He didn't look at me while I testified. He stared straight ahead. Jaw tight, eyes flat. That was fine. I wasn't talking to him. I was talking to the judge, to the record. To anyone who might someday look back at that transcript and wonder why no one had spoken up sooner. When it was over, when the protective order was extended and the divorce papers were stamped and slid into the tray, I stepped out into the thin afternoon sunlight on the courthouse steps. Wazy was waiting at the bottom. Priya stood beside him, one hand on Tom's arm. They didn't cheer. They didn't hug me too hard. They just were there. The girl who had once curled into herself on a sagging couch, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice she was disappearing, walked down those steps on her own feet. But I didn't feel alone. As we headed toward the street, Priya slipped something small into my hand. It was a tiny battery-powered tea light. "For your window," she said. "In case someone walks by your building one night, wondering if it ever gets better. They should see proof that at least one person made it out." That night, back in my studio above the laundromat, I set the little candle on the windowsill and turned it on. The light was small. The room was plain. My bruise had faded to a sickly yellow, my heart still flinched at sudden noises, and the future was a long, messy thing I hadn't figured out yet. But that glow on the glass, it wasn't a signal that I needed saving. It was a sign. Not, "Help me." Just, "I made it. You can too." And for the first time in years, the silence around me didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace.